What's your comic book story? Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Guys, I have a real treat for you today because today we're going to look at my first comic book ever. And at some times in my life, my last comic book ever.
Huh?
I'm sure none of you know this, but I have lived all around the world the last 10 years, from West Australia to Prague in the center of Europe to Edinburgh in Scotland and all around Italy, even Thailand. And in all that time, it was really hard to have a physical comic book collection. I mean, imagine flying around the world, every 6 months to a year, carrying 1,000 comic books with you. No chance, right? But all that time, there was one comic book that made the trip with me. And that's why I say that in that time, it wasn't just my first comic book, it was my last comic book too. That comic book is Amazing Spider Man 40, The End of the Green Goblin. When I was a kid, I sort of inherited my dad's comic book collection. They were in the corner of the dining room, was it maybe? The spare room. And when I finally did discover them and go through those long boxes for the first time, it was like absolute treasure trove. You're flipping through these images and you're seeing these covers and you're seeing things you've never seen before. Neil Gaiman maybe said it best when he said comic books are like postcards from another dimension, from another reality, windows into places that otherwise wouldn't exist. And I remember seeing the first appearance of Punisher on Amazing Spider-Man, whatever it is, 121. I remember seeing Lobo for the first time, and Sergeant Fury, and his Howling Commandos, and all kinds of different Jack Kirby and Ditko and Bushima and all these great artists. There's a guy on the tip of my tongue. Never mind. But anyways, I devoured the stuff, right? I really got into it. And every Saturday afternoon, I would head to the long boxes and open them up and just pile all these things up in front of me and spread them all out over the dinner table. And outside of even just reading them, I was looking at them, I was like, my imagination was running wild. And then one day, getting home from school, I came home and I was going to head straight to the comic books. And my parents said, no, 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 no. Something happened. And I said, what? And they said there was a leak, there was a flood from upstairs, and it got all over the comic books. So they're ruined. We had to throw them away. So I'm devastated, right? Imagine that news. My comic book collection is over. It's gone. In one foul swoop, the whole thing is out the window. But there is one comic book in terrible shape that for whatever reason wasn't in those long boxes that day. And it's this comic book, Amazing Spider-Man 40. And all this time, wherever I've been, wherever I've gone, this comic book has come with me, like as a reminder of that thing that I loved all those years ago, that I lost all those years ago, like a great tragedy, right? I have never opened this comic book in all that time. And all these years, I mean, I can't even tell you how many. Partially because of the shape it's in. We're going to look at it in a second. And for another reason, I guess, because I didn't want to make it any worse than it is. I don't know. Today, we're going to open Amazing Spider-Man 40, and we're going to look at my first and last comic book. Okay, so here we go. And you're going to see in a second just how fragile a book this is. And I mean, you talk about that CGC scale of 0 to 10. Guys, this is about as close to a 0 as you might be able to get on account of how much it's falling apart. And we're going to see that in a second here. Okay, first of all, the cover looks like it's absolutely going to come off. I'm going to have to be really careful here. You can see, there's just barely a staple holding on. You can see those edges missing. This is 1966. So just imagine 1966 right now, like friggin' what's at the top of the charts in 1966? California Dreamin', probably.
All the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray.
And best picture would have been The Sound of Music, maybe something like that. That's a whole world ago, right? And I think we're still pre comic book store, a good way pre the comic book store. So this again would have been a cover on a newsstand or in a grocery store or something like that, that a kid could have picked up for 12 cents, that my dad probably picked up for 12 cents. Just imagine that. Imagine a cover like this, you know, on the newsstand, and some kid going down to the shop for bubble gum or whatever and being able to pick up Amazing Spider-Man 40, the end of the Green Goblin, for 12 measly cents. Unbelievable. It's also one of the comics that for me, I've read in other formats. Wow, it's delicate. That is part of my favorite Amazing Spider-Man run of all time. The Stan Lee, John Romita run, to me, is the best. It's the peak of Spider-Man comics. I love the Ditko run, the earlier Ditko run, the original, because Ditko is creating everything that becomes Spider-Man's New York, right? Like almost everything that we now think of when we think of Spider-Man's New York, you know, that Sinister Six, that rogues gallery, the tragedy and drama that defines Peter Parker. A lot of that is Ditko's vision, but I think John Romita took what Ditko did and really began to perfect what Ditko did. And I think by 1966, comics had evolved already by the time, since Fantastic Four #1 and since early Spider-Man. This is 40. You know, it's been some years now. Things have moved on and things have progressed. And I think the innocence of early Spider-Man and the creativity of early Ditko, it reaches a real like moment of just right in the Stan Lee and John Romita run. And this is an issue from that run. And it's pretty crazy to see it open in front of me now, finally, after all these years, this one issue, you know. I've read it before in collected editions, but pretty crazy to see the real thing in front of me. Pretty amazing first page too, where Peter Parker's put on quite a bit of muscle. Wow, so weird to touch the real page. Peter Parker's put on quite a bit of muscle since those early Ditko days. And you get Norman Osborn too, revealing himself to Peter Parker, right? This is the moment where Peter Parker learns that the Green Goblin is Norman Osborn, the father of his friend at the time, Harry. On and off friend, right? Kind of rival more than anything at times. I love the page. I love the splash, that Marvel splash, that first page. It really jumps out at you. Everything about it's a defining moment. For a lot of us, I think, too, the Green Goblin is like one of those characters we remember seeing first in superhero villains, right? The Willem Dafoe Green Goblin. For some of us of a certain age, is like a real defining character for so many of us. And it's really cool how mental, how mad John Romita is able to portray him, right? Like a moment of doubt, and then look at the changing emotion, the subtlety of the changes on his face is real masterful stuff. You can see the Jack Kirby influence. And at this time in the mid to late 60s, like everybody was trying to do Jack Kirby, right? Everybody was borrowing from the King. And that was on purpose. That was something taught to them. That was something suggested by Stan Lee. Like, hey, Jack Kirby comics are selling and he's our man, so you draw it like him and you'll be a success too. Like, you can just imagine that sort of a pitch to all the new artists. Like, you learn your Jack Kirby and then we'll see, Buster. So the Marvel bullpen was kind of like that, where everybody was like, look at that face. That's such a Kirby. There's so much Kirby influence here. That Kirby influence was huge, but then a lot of these guys, Romita included, would go on to really define a style of their own and perfect a style of their own. It's funny, it's ironic too, because they pitched Spider-Man to Jack Kirby originally instead of Steve Ditko. And Stan Lee hated the way Jack Kirby drew Spider-Man. Way too heroic, way too action figure-y, way too strong, way too, not vulnerable enough. And then by the Romita years, Peter Parker's pretty muscle bound, and everything is a lot more macho. So funny how it shook out, really. And look at just how much writing there is on these pages too. Like I always say about old comics, the storytelling is so much more full, right? There's a lot more in these panels. It would take you a long time to be reading a comic book back in the day, where now I can flip through a comic book pretty quickly. I mean, nowadays we're used to reading compendiums and omnibuses and things like that, and we blow through them pretty quickly, but good luck trying to read one of old Spider-Man or any 60s comic. There's a lot. It's very dense. I love this amazing Green Goblin origin story where he's exploded upon and it kind of drives him into madness. You know, one of the coolest things about the Green Goblin as a villain is that he's not just evil for no reason. He's not just a bank robber or a bad guy or anything like that. He's not a monster. Well, I was gonna say he's not a monster. It's because he's disturbed, right? He's mentally ill. He has like a split personality where he goes from Norman Osborn, this kind of like commandeering, like man of industry, like leader of industry, right? Overbearing father, kind of aggressive and so on. But he also has this other side to him where he's like fully unleashed, like completely insane. And he's a really interesting character. And it just goes to show like that Marvel Comics at the time, while yes, there is like a this is for kids kind of feel to some of them, especially these early comics, that there's a psychology going on here at all is interesting and makes for interesting villains and really interesting heroes too. And Peter Parker, who, has a lot on his shoulders for a really young guy. I love the Romita portrayal of J. Jonah Jameson too. Amazing. So influential. So well drawn, so much personality coming out of that character. Not a big fan of old lady Aunt May, but that's going to be something that remains for a really long time. And how cool are these 1960s hairstyles on some of these characters as well. Really love the floating heads here too from John Romita. Peter Parker thinking about all these different people and how to balance all these things and so on. Really cool. By the way, Betty Brant is an early girlfriend of Peter Parker who kind of disappears as we get on, right? With Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy becoming a major part of his story. Betty Brant kind of fades into the background. She works with him originally at the Daily Bugle, and then it cuts back to like the story of the now, right? Where we start to see Green Goblin's plans for Peter Parker now that he's caught and things like that. And fortunately to the rescue, the Human Torch. As usual, Spider-Man's New York and the Marvel universe is expanding all the time. And by the mid to late 60s, the Marvel universe is really becoming, like I said, peak. It's like really getting good. And the interactions between characters and the fully realized world of New York City at the time, into the mid to late 60s, it's really starting to happen. And I think it's really cool that they cross paths as often as they do. It makes it feel real that they all kind of live in the same, in quotation marks, neighborhood, right? In the same city, at least. The fight scene here too between Peter Parker and the Green Goblin is awesome. You start to see what the Green Goblin is capable of, and you see those pumpkin bombs, right? Later on with Harry Osborn, the Hobgoblin, you're going to see a lot more of that. So it's kind of cool. That idea is this old, right? And later on it becomes, much more of a character defining attribute a little later on. Wow, look at this little guy in this ad. Really reminiscent of Cuphead or of Fallout, isn't it? The Pip-Boy. And yet, what is it? Factories are turning out millions of appliances daily. Who will repair them? Start your own business. Oh, funny. You could be this little repairman. Weird. I love the Kirby Crackle again. Guys, I keep saying Kirby Crackle. Jack Kirby had this thing that he would do where he wanted to draw light. And what he would do is this crackle effect. And that's the way he drew it. And you can see how much the influence carries over on some of these artists in the Marvel bullpen, like a John Romita. There was something else I saw there that was super this. This is extremely Kirby, very reminiscent. This pose here, look at the giant hands of the Hulk from the Avengers #1 cover. That is a super Kirby figure. But I mean, that's going to be happening everywhere you go. Like even with the Bushimas, Sal and John Buscema, there's so much Kirby crossover. However, those guys will all like come out of their shells and out of Jack Kirby's shadow a little bit too. Wow. Amazing moment here where the Green Goblin is down on his hands and knees. His head is down. His face is concealed. Almost that moment of defeat at the hands of Peter Parker. I love this where he's looking over his shoulder and you get the maniac eyes of the Goblin, the giant ears. It's a really cool design for a character, and that this is supposed to be a costume is really interesting. Doesn't look anything like a costume, right? Is this a costume? This green skin and so on? It's almost, if you think about it too hard, it makes no sense, so don't. But we've seen the Green Goblin in all kinds of different looks throughout the years, the more technological and so on, the more monstrous even in Ultimate Spider-Man. I really like the original Goblin design, and I really like this era Spider-Man too. John Romita is going to really, like I said, perfect the character. So eventually, Peter Parker has him beat, right? Spider-Man gets him at the end of the day. And you see here like what effect that has on Norman Osborn, that he can't even remember being the Green Goblin. All those things he did then, they're kind of like lost to him, right? That memory is completely erased, and he doesn't even know that he regrets it. So Peter throws the Goblin to the flames and kind of goes home and checks on Aunt May, right? His other responsibilities, and she's okay, and he gets in bed to have a rest, and Norman Osborn is back with his son, and it feels like that's it. That's the last of the Green Goblin. Once and for all, he's been defeated. But we all know. Wow, no back cover. I didn't realize that. Okay, something cool. But we all know that the Green Goblin is going to be a Spider-Man villain that recurs again and again and helps define Peter Parker and Spider-Man as a character. And maybe some of Peter's worst tragedies are experienced at the hands of the Green Goblin. So what an awesome comic book it is. What a really cool issue. And I feel, really glad to finally have opened this thing up. I probably never will again, considering the shape it's in, but it is really cool to show it off and be able to talk to you about it. So let me know in the comments, what's your comic book story? How did you get into comics? What inspired you? What stuck with you? What are you nostalgic about as far as comic books? Anyways, guys, that's been the show this week. I'll catch you next week with something else. Probably something else old. We'll look at something else from the 1960s. I have a few things in mind. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, guys. It's a new channel. It helps so much. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next week.